I never thought I'd reach 79 feeling like a stranger to my own children. Last Tuesday, while deadheading the roses that my late husband Harold planted 40 years ago, I realized something startling. My 3 grown children hadn't called in 6 weeks. Not one of them. Elias was busy with his corporate empire, Vera consumed by her documentaries about everyone else's family dysfunction, and Sebastian floating through life like dandelion seeds on the wind. They'd reduced me to birthday cards and obligatory holiday visits. Would they even notice if I disappeared tomorrow? Or would they simply show up to claim their inheritance? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I suppose I should explain how I arrived at this peculiar crossroads in my life, sitting in the morning light of my conservatory, plotting what some might call an elaborate revenge against my own children. But revenge feels too harsh a word for what I'm contemplating. Justice, perhaps. Or maybe just a mother's last, desperate attempt to understand who her children really became when she wasn't looking. Marigold Vale has been my sanctuary for 53 years. Harold and I bought this rambling Victorian estate in 1971 when the paint was peeling and the gardens had surrendered to weeds. The house sits on 47 acres of rolling Vermont countryside, surrounded by maple forests that explode into brilliant oranges and reds each October. We chose this place not for its grandeur, but for its potential, much like the children we'd eventually raise here. The conservatory where I spend my mornings is Harold's greatest gift to me. He spent 3 summers building it himself, installing glass panels that catch the sunrise and hold it like cupped hands. The space overflows with orchids, jasmine, and rare specimen plants I've collected from my travels as a botanist. Each morning, I sit here with my coffee and Harold's old journal, the one where he documented every plant we added to the estate. His handwriting fills the margins with observations about soil conditions and bloom cycles, but also with personal notes. Iris laughed until she cried when the sprinkler soaked her during the dahlia planting. Or, the children built a fort in the rhododendron grove today. Those were the golden years, when Elias was still small enough to ride on Harold's shoulders while we toured the gardens, when Vera would spend hours making fairy houses from twigs and moss, when Sebastian would fall asleep in my lap while I read botanical texts aloud. The estate felt alive then, filled with the sounds of growing things and growing children. But children grow up, and sometimes they grow away. Elias left for Harvard Business School at 22, and never really came back. Oh, he visits, always, with his wife Camille and their perfectly orchestrated schedules. They arrive in their spotless Range Rover, stay exactly 48 hours, and leave with the efficiency of a diplomatic mission. Elias has transformed himself into someone I barely recognize, all sharp suits and strategic thinking, treating conversations like board meetings where emotional displays are considered weaknesses. Vera departed in a blaze of fury at 18, convinced that Harold and I were hopelessly conventional and that she needed to save the world from people like us. She's built a career making documentaries about social justice, which I admire. But she applies that same critical lens to our family, finding us guilty of crimes we didn't know we'd committed. Her rare visits feel like investigative journalism, assignments where she gathers evidence of our failures. Sebastian, my youngest, drifted away more gradually, like smoke dissipating on a breeze. He's 42 now, unmarried, and still discovering himself through various spiritual and creative pursuits. He sends postcards from ashrams and music festivals, calls on my birthday, and promises to visit soon. Soon has been ongoing for 3 years. The irony isn't lost on me that I raised 3 children who became experts at analyzing, documenting, and inspiring others, yet who seem incapable of simply being present with their mother. Mrs. Greer. Mattingly, my housekeeper of 30 years, often finds me in the conservatory staring at Harold's journal. "You're brooding again," she'll say, refilling my coffee cup with the no-nonsense efficiency that has kept this household running since the Reagan administration. Greer is 74 herself, but she moves through the estate like a woman half her age, maintaining standards that would make a military commander proud. "I'm reflecting," I told her last week. "Same thing, different word," she replied. "You've been reflecting since Harold passed, and it's done nothing but make you melancholy. What you need is a project." Greer was right, though I doubt she envisioned the project I've been designing. The seed of my plan began germinating 6 months ago, during what I now think of as the incident. I'd fallen in the garden while pruning the climbing roses. Nothing serious, just a twisted ankle that left me temporarily immobile. I called Elias first. Voicemail, Vera. Straight to voicemail, Sebastian. His phone seemed to be disconnected entirely. I spent 4 hours sitting in the dirt beside the rose bushes, unable to walk, before Greer found me. 4 hours contemplating the fact that I could have been lying there indefinitely, and my children would have been none the wiser. That evening, Elias finally returned my call. His concern felt performative, like he was reading from a customer service script. "Mother, I'm so sorry I missed your call. Board meeting ran late. Are you quite all right? Do you need me to arrange for a doctor? A nurse?" He offered solutions, before understanding the problem, treating my accident like a business crisis requiring immediate delegation. Vera called the next morning, her documentary filmmaker's instincts immediately suspicious. "Mom, what exactly happened? Had you been drinking? Are you taking medications that affect your balance? Maybe we should discuss hiring full-time help." She approached my fall like an investigation, gathering facts to build a case about my declining capabilities. Sebastian texted a week later from some wellness retreat in Costa Rica. "Greer told me about your fall, sending healing energy your way. The universe is asking you to slow down and listen to your body's wisdom." None of them offered to come home. None of them asked what I actually needed, which wasn't medical attention or hired help or cosmic energy, but simply their presence, their acknowledgement that I remained a person worthy of their time and concern, not just an aging obligation to be managed from a distance. That's when I began planning my summer of reckoning. The legal arrangements took months to coordinate. I worked with Jonathan Westfield, the family attorney who's handled Vale affairs since before Harold's death. Jonathan is Harold's age and understands the complex dance of family dynamics and inheritance law. Initially, he thought I was joking. "You want to make your children compete for their inheritance?" he asked, peering over his reading glasses with the expression of a man who'd seen everything and was surprised to encounter something new. "I want to understand who they've become," I corrected. "The competition is simply the framework. We structured it carefully, legally airtight. My will currently divides the estate equally among the 3 children, with modest trust funds for any grandchildren. But I've added a codicil that allows me to redistribute everything based on demonstrated character and family commitment during the evaluation period. The evaluation period being this summer's gathering at Marigold Vale. They don't know about the codicil yet. They think they're coming for a simple family reunion, a chance to reconnect and spend quality time together, as I phrased it in my invitations. What they'll discover is that every interaction, every choice, every moment of kindness or selfishness will be observed and evaluated, I'm not dying, despite what they might assume when they receive their invitations. My health is excellent for a woman of 79, my mind sharp, my spirit perhaps more mischievous than it's been in years. This isn't about preparing for my death. It's about understanding how to live the rest of my life. Do I leave my legacy to children who see me as an obligation? Or do I discover that beneath their adult armor, traces of the loving, connected people I raised still exist? The invitations went out 3 weeks ago. Formal cream-colored cards with gold borders, the kind I used for important occasions when the children were young. The honor of your presence is requested for a summer gathering at Marigold Vale, June, through August, to celebrate family and create lasting memories. Each invitation included a handwritten note. To Elias, "Your business acumen has always impressed me. I'd love your advice on some estate planning matters." To Vera, "I've been thinking about documenting the family history. Your storytelling skills would be invaluable." To Sebastian, "The gardens need attention this summer. I remember how you loved helping me plant when you were small." The responses arrived within days. Elias's assistant called to coordinate dates with his schedule. Vera emailed a series of questions about my motivations and expectations. Sebastian sent an enthusiastic voice message about returning to our roots and healing family wounds through reconnection with the land. None of them seemed suspicious. Why would they be? In their minds, I'm simply their aging mother, finally reaching out after years of their benign neglect. They probably assume I'm feeling my mortality and want to play grandmother to their busy, important lives. They have no idea that their mother, the botanist, has spent months cultivating a very different kind of garden this summer. One where character grows or withers depending on the care and attention it receives. Where the final harvest will determine not just inheritance, but understanding. The summer solstice is next week. They'll all be here by then, settling into their childhood bedrooms, reacquainting themselves with the rhythms of Marigold Vale. And I'll be watching, with Harold's journal in my lap, and 40 years of motherhood sharpening my observations. Let the experiment begin. The morning Elias arrived, I was in the kitchen helping Greer prepare what she insisted on calling a proper welcome breakfast. Greer had been cooking since dawn, filling the house with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls, as if aromatic abundance could compensate for years of emotional distance. "He's early," Greer observed, glancing through the window at the approaching Range Rover. 8:15. Probably had his assistant schedule his arrival to maximize productivity. I smoothed my gardening apron and checked my reflection in the chrome surface of the coffee pot. At 79, I've stopped pretending that age hasn't marked me. But I still want to look purposeful, rather than pitiful when my children arrive. Elias emerged from his vehicle with the measured efficiency of a man accustomed to controlling his environment. At 55, he's grown distinguished in the way that successful men do. His hair silver at the temples, his posture commanding. His wife Camille followed, dressed in what I recognized as carefully curated, country casual. Designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, paired with a cashmere sweater in a shade of blue that matched her eyes perfectly. Mother. Elias embraced me with the kind of hug he might give a respected business colleague. "You look well. The Vermont air agrees with you." Camille kissed both my cheeks in the European fashion she'd adopted since becoming an influencer. "Iris, darling, the estate looks absolutely magical. I've already taken 17 photos just walking from the car." I studied Camille as we settled, in the breakfast nook. She's 12 years younger than Elias, with the kind of polished beauty that photographs well, and the professional warmth that comes from years of treating her life as content. But underneath the performative cheerfulness, I detected something I hadn't expected. Genuine curiosity about me, not just the backdrop I provided for her visit. "How have you been really, Iris?" she asked, leaning forward with an intensity that caught me off guard. "I know we don't talk often enough, but I think about you. This place, what it must be like living here alone." The question was so direct, so different from Elias's polite inquiries about my health and household management, that I found myself answering honestly. "Some days I feel like I'm caretaking a museum," I admitted. "Harold and I filled this house with love and noise and chaos, and now it's just me and Greer and 47 acres of memories." Elias shifted uncomfortably, clearly preferring conversations that stayed safely in the realm of logistics rather than emotions. "We should discuss your support systems while I'm here. I've researched some excellent assisted living communities in the area. Nothing institutional, of course. High-end places that cater to people of your background." The casual cruelty of his assumption that I needed to be managed rather than visited confirmed everything I'd suspected about how my children viewed me. Not as a person with her own desires and agency, but as a problem requiring solution. "I'm not ready for assisted living," I said mildly, "but I am ready to discuss some changes." Vera arrived that afternoon in a rental car that looked like it had been chosen for fuel efficiency rather than comfort. She emerged wearing her documentary filmmaker uniform, dark jeans, practical boots, and a vintage leather jacket that managed to look both professional and slightly rebellious. At 52, Vera has Harold's sharp features and my stubborn chin, combined with an intensity that can feel overwhelming in small doses. Her partner Luca followed, carrying cameras and sound equipment with the casual competence of someone accustomed to being behind the scenes. He's a gentle presence, soft-spoken with kind eyes, and an accent that makes even mundane observations sound poetic. "Maman," Vera said, using the French endearment she'd adopted during her rebellious phase, and never abandoned. "You look—" She paused, studying me with the analytical gaze she usually reserved for documentary subjects. "Different. More focused somehow." Luca kissed my hand in the old-fashioned way. "Mrs. Vale, thank you for welcoming me. Vera has told me so many stories about this place, but seeing it, c'est magnifique." During dinner, Vera's investigative instincts emerged. "So what's this really about, Mom? The invitations were pretty formal for a casual family gathering. Are you sick? Did something happen?" "Can't a mother want to spend time with her children without ulterior motives?" I asked. "Not after 40 years of knowing you," Vera replied with the bluntness that had characterized our relationship since her teenage years. "You're planning something. I can tell." Elias looked up from his perfectly arranged plate. "Planning what exactly?" "Mother, if you're concerned about estate management or health care directives, we should involve the appropriate professionals." The assumption that I couldn't manage my own affairs, coming from both children simultaneously, crystallized my resolve. They saw me as either deceptive or declining, incapable of transparency or independence. Sebastian's arrival the next morning changed the entire energy of the house. He pulled up in a converted van covered with bumper stickers from various music festivals and spiritual retreats, his arrival announced by the sound of Grateful Dead songs drifting through open windows. At 42, Sebastian remains the most physically affectionate of my children. He swept me into a genuine hug that lasted long enough for me to smell patchouli and sunshine in his hair, to feel the solid warmth of my youngest child embracing me without reservation or agenda. "Mom, God, I've missed this place," he said, spinning around the kitchen with his arms outstretched. "And I've missed you. Really missed you. Not just the idea of you, but you." His words, so simple and direct, brought tears I hadn't expected. When had someone last told me they missed me specifically, not just the concept of family or tradition I represented? That evening, after Greer had served one of her legendary roast dinners, and my 3 children sat around the dining table for the first time in 5 years, I made my announcement. "I've asked you all here because I have something important to share," I began, setting down my wine glass with deliberate precision. "I'm restructuring my will." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush flowers. Elias recovered first, his business instincts kicking in. "Mother, that's certainly your prerogative. Do you need help reviewing the documentation? I could have my estate planning attorney take a look." "I don't need help," I said. "I need understanding about who you've become as people, not just as my children." Vera's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that over the next 2 months, I'll be observing how you interact with each other, with me, with this community. Your inheritance will depend not on birth order or legal entitlement, but on character. The explosion of questions and objections that followed was entirely predictable. Elias demanded to know the legal parameters. Vera accused me of emotional manipulation. Sebastian asked if this was about spiritual growth or financial punishment. I let them vent their initial shock and outrage, then raised my hand for silence. "The estate is worth approximately $4 million, I said quietly. "The investments and trust funds add another $2 million. Whoever demonstrates the greatest capacity for love, service, and genuine connection will inherit everything. The others will receive token amounts." "This is insane," Vera whispered. "This is brilliant," Sebastian said simultaneously. Elias stared at me with something approaching respect for the first time in years. "You're serious. Completely serious. You'll be staying here for the summer, all of you. Tomorrow I'll explain the specific expectations. Tonight I suggest you consider why you came when I called and what that reveals about your priorities." After they'd dispersed to their rooms, Elias and Camille to the master guest suite, Vera and Luca to her childhood bedroom, Sebastian to his old room in the attic, I sat alone in Harold's study, pulling his old task lists from the desk drawer. Harold had been a natural teacher, always creating small challenges for the children that disguised lessons as games. Build a garden that attracts butterflies. Help Mrs. Pemberton next door organize her late husband's books. Learn to cook a meal that makes someone smile. I'd adapted his approach for my current purposes, creating a summer-long curriculum in character development. The tasks would range from mundane household responsibilities to community service projects, each designed to reveal something essential about who my children had become. But as I sat in the lamplight surrounded by Harold's botanical journals and our children's baby photos, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Was I engineering reconciliation or guaranteeing permanent estrangement? Outside the study window, I could hear Vera and Luca talking in low, urgent voices. Sebastian was playing guitar softly in his room above. Elias and Camille's voices carried down the hallway, discussing strategies and contingencies. Tomorrow the real test would begin. Tonight I allowed myself to hope that somewhere underneath their adult complications, I might rediscover the children who once built fairy houses in my rhododendron grove and fell asleep listening to botanical texts. The first official task revealed, More about my children's characters than I'd anticipated, though perhaps not in the ways I'd hoped. I announced it during breakfast after Greer had served fresh blueberry pancakes made from berries Sebastian had picked at dawn, during what he called his morning meditation walk. "Your first assignment is simple," I said, consulting the notebook where I'd outlined the summer's challenges. "Each couple will choose a local organization to serve for the next 2 weeks. 20 hours minimum, but the quality of engagement matters more than quantity." I'd prepared a board listing options: the county food bank, the elderly care center, the literacy program at the library, the community garden project, and the animal rescue shelter, organizations where I'd volunteered over the years, where genuine need existed, and pretense would be immediately transparent. Elias studied the board with the same intensity he probably applied to merger documents. "What are the evaluation criteria? How will our contributions be measured?" "Through observation and feedback from the organizations themselves," I replied. "I'll be checking in with supervisors and, when possible, observing your work directly." Camille surprised everyone by speaking first. "I'd like to work at the elderly care center. I spent time with my grandmother before she passed, and I know how much visitors mean to people who don't get regular family contact." Her choice carried an unspoken criticism that made Elias visibly uncomfortable. I noticed that she'd volunteered for the assignment most directly relevant to my own situation. Perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not. Elias nodded approvingly at his wife's selection while making his own strategic calculation. "The food bank makes sense for us. It's a substantial operation that could benefit from business process improvements." I watched Vera roll her eyes at her brother's immediate impulse to treat charity work as a consulting opportunity. "Luca and I will take the literacy program," she announced. "Education access is a justice issue, I understand." Sebastian stretched like a cat in the morning sun, streaming through the breakfast nook. "Mom, is there anything involving the actual land? The animals? The environment? That board feels kind of institutional." "There's the community garden project," I suggested. "They're developing plots for families who don't have yard space." "Perfect. That's real work. Physical work. Working with growing things, helping people connect with the earth." Sebastian's enthusiasm was genuine, though I noticed his siblings' barely concealed amusement at his spiritual interpretation of what was essentially manual labor. The next morning I began my own investigation, driving my old Subaru to each location to understand how my children approached service when they thought I wasn't watching. At the Maple Ridge Senior Center, I arrived during the lunch hour to find Camille sitting with a table of elderly women, genuinely engaged in conversation rather than performing charitable obligation. She was showing photos on her phone. Not her curated Instagram content, but candid shots of her and Elias's travels. "This is from our trip to Tuscany last year," she was saying to Margaret Donnelly, an 86-year-old former teacher. The light reminded me of something from a painting. Margaret leaned closer to examine the photo. "I taught art for 40 years, and I always told my students that the best camera is an observant eye. You see beauty in ordinary moments." "I'm trying to get better at that," Camille replied. "Sometimes I get so focused on making things look perfect that I forget to actually experience them." The conversation felt authentic in a way that surprised me. Camille's professional persona, all brightness and carefully crafted enthusiasm, had been replaced by something more tentative but real. Later, I found her in the activities room, helping residents with a watercolor painting class. She wasn't leading or directing, just sitting beside an elderly man named Frank, offering gentle encouragement as he struggled to mix colors for a landscape. "I'm not much of an artist," Frank was saying, his hands shaking slightly as he held the brush. "Neither am I," Camille admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't being good at it." When I approached to introduce myself as a visitor, Camille's face flushed with what looked like embarrassment. "Iris, I didn't know you were stopping by." "I was in the neighborhood," I said diplomatically. "How are you finding the work here?" "Humbling," she replied without hesitation. "These people have lived entire lifetimes, survived wars and losses and joys I can't imagine, and I come in here talking about my little problems. It puts things in perspective." Frank looked up from his painting. "Your daughter-in-law is a treasure, Mrs. Vale. She actually listens when we old folks ramble on." The word treasure stuck with me as I drove to the food bank, where I expected to find Elias applying his business expertise to organizational challenges. Instead, I discovered him in the warehouse, inefficiently stacking canned goods while deep in conversation with Tommy Restrepo, the operations manager. Tommy was explaining the complexities of food distribution, the challenge of matching donations with actual needs, the dignity issues involved in helping families who'd never imagined requiring assistance. "The hardest part," Tommy was saying, "is the suburban families who lost jobs during the pandemic. They're embarrassed to be here, don't know how to ask for help. Different from our regular clients who understand the system." Elias was listening with an attention I hadn't seen him give to anything in years. "How do you help them feel more comfortable?" "Respect, mostly, and practical stuff, like not making them wait in a line outside where neighbors might see. Having a separate entrance, making sure the process feels like shopping, not charity." "That's smart," Elias said, "preserving autonomy within assistance." Later, when the morning rush ended, I watched Elias help load groceries into a young mother's car. She had 2 small children clinging to her legs, and the exhausted look of someone managing impossible circumstances. "The formula you requested came in yesterday," Elias told her quietly, adding an extra case to her trunk. "And Tommy mentioned you were looking for work. My company isn't hiring in this area, but I know some people who might have leads." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I used to be an accountant before my husband left. I just need something part-time, while the kids are small." "I'll make some calls," Elias promised, and something in his voice convinced me he actually would. This was not the Elias I knew, the one who treated problems as equations requiring efficient solutions. This was someone grappling with complexity, allowing himself to be affected by other people's struggles. At the library, Vera was running a reading group for adults learning English, her documentary filmmaker skills translating surprisingly well to patient, clear instruction. But what struck me most was watching her work with Maria Santos, a woman about her own age who was studying for her citizenship test. "The Constitution can be confusing even for native speakers," Vera was saying. "Don't feel bad about asking questions." Maria struggled with a passage about voting rights. "In my country, elections are not, how do you say, honest. Here seems different, but I do not understand all the words." Instead of offering a simple explanation, Vera pulled out her phone and showed Maria clips from one of her documentaries about voter suppression. "It's complicated here, too," she admitted. "Democracy is something we have to keep working at." Their conversation evolved into something deeper than English instruction. Vera was learning as much as she was teaching, hearing Maria's perspectives on American systems from an immigrant's viewpoint. "You make films about these things?" Maria asked. "I try to. But I'm realizing I might not understand them as well as I thought. The admission surprised me. Vera had always been so certain of her position, so confident in her analysis of social issues. Here she was acknowledging the limits of her knowledge, letting someone else's experience challenge her assumptions. Sebastian's assignment at the community garden revealed a different side of my youngest son. I found him on his knees in rich soil, teaching a group of children from the housing development how to plant tomato seedlings. "See how the roots are all tangled up in the pot?" he was saying to a serious-looking girl of about 8. "We need to gentle them loose so they can spread out in their new home." "Will it hurt the plant?" the girl asked. "Maybe a little at first. Change usually does. But if we're careful and give it good soil and water, it'll grow stronger than before." The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Sebastian was talking about plants, but describing something larger about transformation and resilience. "Mr. Sebastian," another child called out, "my mom says we can't afford to buy vegetables at the store. Is that why we're growing them?" Sebastian paused in his digging, considering his answer carefully. "Growing your own food is powerful. It means you can take care of yourself and your family, and it connects you to the earth, to the seasons, to something bigger than just buying stuff." An older woman I recognized as Dolores Martinez, the garden coordinator, joined me in observing. "Your son is a natural teacher," she said. "These kids have been through a lot. Poverty, instability, some family trauma. He has a gift for making them feel capable instead of needy." Later, I watched Sebastian help the children harvest lettuce for a salad they'd make together. His movements were patient, unhurried, completely focused on the task and the young people beside him. The restless, scattered energy that had characterized his adult years seemed to have settled into something more purposeful. That evening, as we gathered for dinner, I noticed subtle changes in how my children interacted. Camille asked Vera specifics, questions about the literacy program, genuinely curious about the challenges adult learners faced. Vera inquired about Elias's insights into food insecurity, listening to his response without her usual defensive skepticism. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Sebastian shared stories about the garden children with the kind of detail that suggested real emotional investment. This little girl, Sophia, told me her family used to have a big garden in Guatemala before they came here. She's teaching me as much as I'm teaching her. "It's funny," Camille observed, "how much these assignments are teaching us about things we thought we already understood." Elias nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that. I assumed I understood poverty from a policy perspective, but working with actual families, it's different, more complicated. Most injustice is more complicated up close," Vera said, but without her usual lecture tone. That's what I'm learning too. As I listened to their conversation, I felt a cautious optimism growing. The competition aspect of their inheritance seemed to be receding behind something more important. Genuine engagement with work that mattered. They were changing. Not because they were competing against each other, but because they were discovering something about themselves through service. But I also noticed what was missing from their reports. None of them had mentioned connecting with me directly, asking about my own experiences with these organizations, or inviting me to join their work. They were growing as individuals, which was encouraging, but the distance between us remained. The real test would come when the community service ended, and I introduced the next phase of my evaluation. Would this spirit of engagement extend to their family relationships, or was kindness something they could only manage with strangers? 3 weeks into their community service commitments, I decided it was time to raise the stakes. The morning was particularly beautiful, with early July sunshine streaming through the conservatory windows as I reviewed Harold's old correspondence files, a task I'd been postponing for 4 years since his death. That's when I found them, a manila folder labeled Letters to Write in Harold's careful handwriting. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes, one addressed to each of our children, dated just 2 months before he died. My hands trembled as I held them, realizing Harold had written final thoughts to each child, but never found the courage to send them. The letters had remained hidden in his desk drawer, while I focused on his medical care and my own grief, forgotten until this moment when I needed guidance about my children's characters. I shouldn't have read them. They were Harold's private thoughts, meant for our children's eyes. But as I sat surrounded by his botanical journals and the fading scent of morning glory vines, I broke the seals and discovered my late husband's honest assessment of the people our children had become. The letter to Elias was longest, written in Harold's increasingly shaky handwriting. My dear son, I know you think I never understood your ambitions, your need to build something larger than our small family life. But I understood better than you knew. I was proud of your success, even when it took you far from us. What I regretted was never telling you that achievement doesn't require abandoning tenderness. You have your mother's capacity for deep feeling, but you've learned to hide it so well that sometimes I wonder if you remember it exists. Don't let success become a substitute for connection. Money and influence are tools, not destinations. I hope someday you'll find the courage to let people see who you really are underneath all that armor. The letter to Vera was shorter but equally penetrating. Vera, my passionate daughter, you inherited my love of justice and your mother's fierce intelligence. I admired your commitment to fighting for others, but I worried that you'd forgotten how to fight for yourself, for us. Your documentaries about other families' healing made me proud, but they also made me sad that you couldn't apply that same compassion to your own family's wounds. We weren't perfect parents, but we loved you completely. I hope you'll find a way to document that love alongside our failures. Sebastian's letter was the most heartbreaking. Sweet Sebastian, you were our surprise gift, born when we thought our family was complete. Your gentleness in a harsh world has always amazed me, but I worried that your fear of causing pain made you avoid all conflict, even necessary ones. Sometimes love requires difficult conversations, showing up when it's inconvenient, choosing commitment over comfort. I hope you'll learn that spiritual growth isn't about floating above human messiness, but about diving deeper into it with an open heart. Reading Harold's words, I understood something crucial about my summer experiment. I'd been testing my children's character through service to others, but Harold's letters revealed that their fundamental challenge wasn't about kindness to strangers. It was about courage in intimate relationships. That afternoon, I gathered everyone in the living room for what I announced as a family meeting. Greer had prepared iced tea and her famous lemon cookies, creating an atmosphere of casual comfort that I hoped would lower their defenses. I want to discuss something your father wrote before he died, I began, placing the 3 letters on the coffee table. He intended to give these to each of you, but never found the right moment. The silence that followed was profound. Elias leaned forward, his businessman's composure cracking slightly. What kind of letters? Personal ones, about who he hoped you'd become, what he observed about who you were becoming. I paused, studying their faces. I debated whether to share them at all, but I think they're relevant to why we're all here this summer. Vera's investigative instincts sharpened. You read them? I did, and I think you should read them too, but not yet. First, I want to understand something about your current relationships with each other. Sebastian shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What do you mean? When was the last time you three had a real conversation? Not logistics about holidays or polite updates about your careers, but an honest discussion about your lives, your struggles, your hopes. The question hung in the air like dust motes in afternoon sunlight. I watched them exchange glances, each waiting for someone else to answer. We talk, Elias said finally, though his tone suggested he knew how inadequate the response was. About what? I pressed. Camille spoke unexpectedly. If I may, I've noticed that you all talk around each other. Elias tells me about Vera's career achievements and Sebastian's latest adventures, but he never mentions actually talking to them about personal things. That's not fair, Vera protested. We have different lives now, different priorities, different excuses, I said gently. Your father was worried about exactly this, that you'd learn to love humanity in general, while forgetting how to love each other specifically. The accusation stung, which meant it was accurate. I could see each of them processing the criticism, their defensive mechanisms activating. So what do you want us to do? Sebastian asked. Force intimacy. Pretend we have more in common than we actually do. I want you to try. Really try. Your next assignment is to spend individual time with each sibling. Not group activities, not work projects. One-on-one conversations about your actual lives. Elias frowned. How will you evaluate that? You can't observe private conversations. I'll know by how you treat each other afterward. Whether you start seeing each other as full human beings instead of character sketches from childhood. Over the following days, I watched my children navigate this assignment with varying degrees of resistance and revelation. Elias and Vera chose to walk the estate's woodland paths, perhaps hoping the physical activity would ease the awkwardness of forced intimacy. I observed them from the conservatory windows, noting how they started several feet apart and gradually moved closer as their conversation deepened. Later, Vera told Luca about their walk while I eavesdropped from the kitchen. I had no idea Elias struggled so much when Dad got sick. He was making all these medical decisions while I was off in Afghanistan, filming a documentary about refugees. I judged him for being controlling, but he was just scared and alone. And him? Luca asked. What did he learn about you? That my work isn't just about being righteously angry at the world. That some of it comes from feeling like I failed. Our family by leaving so young, like I have to save other people's families, because I couldn't figure out how to fix my own. Elias and Sebastian met for coffee in town, choosing neutral territory for their first real conversation in years. When they returned, Sebastian seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the weight of being the family's eternal child. Elias offered to help me with some business planning for the wellness coaching, Sebastian told me later. Not in a condescending way, but like he actually respects what I'm trying to build. And what did you learn about him? That success doesn't feel like he thought it would. That he misses being creative, solving problems with his hands instead of just moving money around. We talked about Dad's workshop, how Elias used to love building things before he decided that wasn't practical. The conversation between Vera and Sebastian proved most challenging, perhaps because they'd maintained the illusion of closeness, despite years of minimal contact. They met in Harold's old workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects that spoke to dreams deferred. I found Sebastian afterward sitting alone in the workshop running his hands over Harold's workbench. "How was your talk with Vera?" I asked. "Hard. She's angrier than I realized. Not just at the world, but at us. At you and Dad, for what she sees as emotional neglect. At me for disappearing instead of helping her process family stuff. At Elias for turning into someone she doesn't recognize. And what did you tell her?" "That maybe we all disappeared in different ways. That running away to spiritual retreats isn't really different from running away to boardrooms or behind cameras. We're all hiding from something." The honesty in his voice surprised me. Sebastian had always been the family mediator, smoothing over conflicts with humor and deflection. Hearing him acknowledge his own avoidance patterns suggested a maturity I hadn't credited him with. But it was Camille who provided the most unexpected insight into my children's relationship dynamics. She approached me while I was deadheading roses in the evening garden, moving quietly enough that I didn't notice her until she spoke. "They're all so afraid of disappointing you again," she said without preamble. I looked up from the pink climbing, rose I'd been pruning. "What do you mean?" "The inheritance competition. They're treating it like they've already failed some fundamental test of character, so they might as well compete against each other instead of trying to reconnect with you." Her observation pierced something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. "I wanted them to rediscover their capacity for love." "But you're making them perform love instead of feel it. The tasks, the evaluation, the constant sense of being judged. It's preventing the very intimacy you're hoping to create." Camille's words echoed Harold's letters, his concern that our children had learned to hide their authentic selves behind acceptable performances. I'd designed a summer intended to reveal their true characters, but I'd structured it as another performance, another test they could pass or fail. That night I sat in Harold's study reading his letters again, understanding why he'd never sent them. Sometimes truth is too fragile for direct delivery, requiring patience and trust to emerge naturally. Maybe my summer experiment was misguided. Maybe what my children needed wasn't another evaluation of their worth, but simply the experience of being valued without conditions. Maybe I needed to stop being a judge and remember how to be a mother. I never intended for Greer to find the medical records. They were supposed to remain hidden in my bedroom safe until after the summer ended, until my children had completed their character assessments and inheritance decisions were final. But Greer, in her thorough way of managing household crises, discovered them while searching for my insurance information after I'd fainted in the garden. The fainting spell itself was minor, a moment of dizziness while watering the dahlias, probably caused by the July heat and my stubborn refusal to acknowledge that 79-year-old bodies require more careful management than I'd been providing. But it frightened Sebastian, who found me sitting on the garden path feeling foolish and embarrassed. "Mom, we should call a doctor," he said, crouching beside me with genuine concern. "Or at least get you inside to rest." "I'm fine," I insisted, though the world still felt slightly tilted. "Just too much sun. Help me to the house." Greer took charge with her usual efficiency, settling me in the conservatory with iced tea and a stern lecture about proper hydration. But when I asked her to retrieve my medical insurance card from the bedroom safe, she returned with more than I'd bargained for. "Iris Lenore Vale," she said, standing in the conservatory doorway with a manila folder in her hands and an expression that could have frozen summer roses. "We need to discuss what I found in that safe." My heart sank as I recognized the folder containing Dr. Patricia Henley's reports, the test results I'd been hiding since early spring, the diagnosis that had actually prompted my summer inheritance experiment. "Greer, those are private..." Stage 3 ovarian cancer. Greer's voice cracked on the words. Diagnosed 4 months ago? Iris, what the hell have you been thinking? The medical records spilled across the coffee table like autumn leaves, revealing the truth I'd been concealing. The persistent fatigue I'd attributed to aging. The abdominal discomfort I'd blamed on stress. The weight loss I'd convinced myself was healthy. Dr. Henley's careful notes documented a progression I'd been denying, treatment options I'd been postponing, a prognosis I'd been ignoring. The children can't know, I said quietly. Not yet. Can't know. Greer's voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard from her. Iris, you have cancer. Advanced cancer. You've been putting off treatment while orchestrating some elaborate family drama, and you don't think they deserve to know? The treatment might not work anyway, I said, though the words felt hollow even to me. The summer shouldn't be about pity or fear or deathbed reconciliations. It should be about who they really are. Greer sank into Harold's old reading chair, the medical records scattered between us like evidence of my deception. How long have you known? Since March. I'd been having symptoms for months. But you know how I am about doctors. Stubborn to the point of idiocy. Yes, I'm familiar with that trait. Greer's anger was sharpening into something more dangerous. Disappointment. What exactly is your plan here? Die in the middle of your inheritance competition? Leave your children wondering if their mother's death was some kind of final test? The brutal accuracy of her questions forced me to confront the magical thinking that had driven my decisions. I'd been operating under the fantasy that I could control the timing of everything. The cancer, the family reconciliation, the resolution of decades of accumulated hurt. I wanted to see who they really were before they started performing grief, I admitted. Once they know I'm dying, everything changes. They become loving and attentive because it's appropriate, not because it's authentic. And what if they're genuinely loving and attentive? What if you're denying them the chance to show you care that's real, not performed? Before I could answer, we heard voices approaching the conservatory. My children and their partners were returning from their various afternoon activities, probably drawn by Sebastian's concern about my fainting episode. Greer, I whispered urgently. Please, not yet. But it was too late. Camille appeared in the doorway first, her phone already in hand to document whatever Instagram-worthy moment she'd discovered. The sight of me surrounded by medical papers, and Greer's tear-streaked face stopped her social media instincts cold. Oh my God, Camille breathed, immediately understanding that she'd stumbled into something private and serious. Should I? No, I said, resignation settling over me like evening mist. Come in, all of you. It's time you knew the truth. The next few minutes unfolded with the terrible clarity of a car accident happening in slow motion. Elias entered, with his phone pressed to his ear, probably managing some business crisis, but ended his call mid-sentence when he saw the medical documents. Vera and Luca followed, their afternoon walk interrupted by Sebastian's text about my fainting. Sebastian knelt beside my chair immediately, his spiritual composure cracking. Mom, what's going on? What are all these papers? I looked at each of my children's faces, seeing the transition from concern to confusion to dawning comprehension. I have ovarian cancer, I said simply. Advanced stage. I've known since March. The silence that followed felt different from our usual family awkwardness. This was the profound quiet that accompanies devastating news. The moment when reality shifts and everything familiar becomes uncertain. Elias spoke first, his business training clicking into crisis management mode. What stage exactly? What are the treatment options? Which specialists have you consulted? Stage 3, Greer answered when I hesitated. Dr. Henley at Dartmouth Hitchcock recommended surgery followed by chemotherapy. Your mother has been considering her options for 4 months. Vera's documentary filmmaker instincts emerged as controlled anger. You've been sitting on a cancer diagnosis while making us compete for inheritance. Mom, that's... She struggled for words. That's manipulative beyond anything I could have imagined. It's not manipulative, I protested, though the defense sounded weak even to me. I wanted to understand who you'd become without death, casting a shadow over everything. Sebastian stood abruptly, pacing to the conservatory windows. So this whole summer, the tasks, the evaluations, it's all been based on a lie? Not a lie. An omission. A massive, life-altering omission. Elias corrected, his composure beginning to fracture. Mother, we had a right to know. We had a right to spend, this time differently, to perform grief instead of living authentically, I interrupted. To suddenly become devoted children because death makes it socially appropriate? The accusation hung in the humid air like the scent of overripe fruit. I could see my words hitting their mark, each child recognizing some truth in the criticism while simultaneously resenting its delivery. Camille, surprisingly, broke the tension. Iris, may I ask, why now? Why tell us today? Because I fainted and Greer found the records, and apparently my personal assistant has decided to stage an intervention, I said, glancing at Greer with what I hoped looked like fondness rather than irritation. No, Camille pressed gently. I mean, why did you decide to bring us all here this summer? What does the cancer have to do with the inheritance competition? Her question cut to the heart of everything I'd been avoiding, because I realized I might die without ever knowing if you loved me, or just the idea of me as your mother. Without understanding if the people you'd become were people I'd actually want to leave my legacy to. And you thought the only way to find out was through some elaborate test? Vera's voice was rising. Instead of just asking us? When would I have asked? During our twice-yearly phone calls? During your 48-hour holiday visits where we discuss weather and work and carefully avoid anything personal? The truth of our family's emotional distance hit the room like a physical force. For years, we'd maintained polite connections while avoiding real intimacy, treating love like a given rather than something requiring cultivation and care. Luca, who'd been quietly observing our family dynamics with an outsider's clarity, spoke for the first time. Maybe the question isn't whether you love each other, but whether you know how to show it. His gentle observation shifted something in the room's energy. Instead of competing accusations, we were suddenly confronting a shared failure of emotional communication. I love you all, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I've always loved you, but somewhere along the way, we stopped being able to say that to each other. We stopped being able to be vulnerable or imperfect or needy in each other's presence. Sebastian returned to his chair, reaching for my hand with the directness that had always characterized his affection. Mom, I love you too. I've always loved you. But I've been afraid to show up fully because I was scared of disappointing you again. Again? I asked. I never became the kind of successful adult Elias and Vera became. I never settled down. Never. Built something important. I kept thinking I needed to get my life together before I deserved your attention. Elias leaned forward, his executive composure completely abandoned. Sebastian, I've envied your freedom for years. Your ability to follow your heart instead of expectations. I built this successful career, but I lost touch with everything that actually mattered to me. Vera wiped tears I hadn't seen her shed since childhood. I've been so angry about our family for so long that I forgot we could actually change it. I've been making documentaries about other people's healing while refusing to work on my own. The conversation that followed was unlike anything we'd shared in decades. Raw, honest, filled with admissions and apologies, and the kind of vulnerability I'd been hoping to discover through my summer-long evaluation process. But Greer's concern brought us back to practical realities. "This is all very touching," she said with characteristic bluntness. "But Iris still has cancer that isn't treating itself while you all process family feelings." Dr. Henley's treatment plan lay on the coffee table like a roadmap to an uncertain future. Surgery to remove as much of the cancer as possible, followed by 6 months of chemotherapy, with a prognosis that depended on factors beyond anyone's control. "I'll do the treatment," I announced, the decision crystallizing as I spoke it. "All of it. Surgery, chemotherapy, whatever Dr. Henley recommends." "And we'll be here," Elias said immediately. "All of us. For everything." "The inheritance competition is over," Vera declared. "We'll figure out estate planning later when you're healthy." Sebastian squeezed my hand. "We're not going anywhere, Mom. Not anymore." As my children began discussing logistics and support systems and treatment schedules, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The profound relief of being cared for without having to earn it, loved without having to prove my worth, supported by people who chose to show up not because it was required, but because it mattered. My summer experiment had succeeded, but not in the way I'd planned. Instead of revealing character through competition, it had created space for authenticity through crisis. Sometimes the most important truths emerge not through testing, but through the simple act of allowing ourselves to be seen in our vulnerability and fear. The 3 days following my cancer, revelation transformed Marigold Vale from a setting for family competition into something resembling a military command center. My children approached my diagnosis with the same intensity they'd brought to their inheritance tasks, but now their energy was focused on a single shared mission, ensuring I received the best possible care while maintaining some semblance of normal family life. Elias had immediately taken charge of logistics, his business skills finally applied to something that mattered more than quarterly earnings. He'd contacted Dr. Henley's office, secured my surgery date for the following Tuesday, and researched oncologists with the thoroughness of someone negotiating a crucial merger. "I've identified 3 potential chemotherapy facilities," he announced, during our morning meeting in the breakfast nook, consulting a folder thick with printouts and notes. "Dartmouth Hitchcock is excellent, but it's an hour drive. There's a newer facility in White River Junction that's only 30 minutes, with good reviews and a more comfortable treatment environment." Vera had channeled her documentary instincts into research, creating what she called the Cancer Education Project. She'd spent 2 days interviewing ovarian cancer survivors, oncology nurses, and support group leaders, compiling information about everything from side effects management to nutritional support. The women I talked to all emphasized the importance of maintaining normalcy during treatment, she reported, reading from her carefully organized notes. "Not pretending everything is fine, but keeping routines and relationships that provide emotional anchoring." Sebastian surprised everyone by revealing practical skills none of us had known he possessed. He'd been working with Greer to reorganize the house for my post-surgery recovery, installing grab bars in the master bathroom, creating a comfortable resting area in the conservatory, and researching meal plans that would support my nutritional needs during chemotherapy. I learned a lot about holistic healing during my wellness training," he explained. "Not instead of medical treatment, but alongside it. Things like meditation, gentle yoga, foods that can help manage nausea." The transformation in my children's dynamic was remarkable. Instead of competing against each other, they were collaborating, with the efficiency of people who'd suddenly discovered a shared purpose. Elias deferred to Vera's research expertise. Vera incorporated Sebastian's wellness knowledge into her planning. Sebastian relied on Elias's organizational systems to implement practical changes. But it was their partners who provided emotional insights that my children, still learning how to be vulnerable with each other, couldn't yet articulate. Camille had become my unexpected confidant, perhaps because she was the only one without decades of family history, complicating her responses. She'd sit with me in the evening garden, asking direct questions about my fears and hopes in a way that bypassed the careful politeness my children still sometimes maintained. "Are you afraid of dying?" she asked one evening, her usual social media persona completely absent. "I'm afraid of dying badly," I replied honestly. "Of pain, of losing my dignity, of becoming a burden that overshadows all the good memories." "What would dying well look like to you?" The question surprised me with its directness. "At peace with my relationships, confident that I'd lived meaningfully, not leaving my children with unresolved guilt or resentment." "Then maybe this cancer is giving you something unexpected," Camille said gently. "A chance to address those things while you still can." Luca provided a different perspective. His experience with his own large, emotionally expressive family, serving as a counterpoint to our years of careful distance. He'd begun what he called conversation dinners, where we'd gather around food and simply talk about our days, our memories, our hopes, without agenda or evaluation. "In my family, in Marseille," he told us, "we fight loudly and love loudly, and everything is discussed until everyone is exhausted. It's messy, but it's honest. You Americans are so polite that sometimes you forget to be real." His observation was accurate and challenging. We'd spent so many years avoiding conflict that we'd also avoided intimacy, treating careful politeness as equivalent to genuine care. Greer, meanwhile, had appointed herself as my advocate and guardian, ensuring that our family's good intentions didn't overwhelm my actual needs. When Elias wanted to hire a full-time nurse, Greer pointed out that I valued my independence. When Vera suggested documenting my treatment journey, Greer reminded her that I might not want my illness to become a project. When Sebastian proposed converting the entire house to organic, cancer-fighting foods, Greer noted that I still enjoyed my morning coffee and evening wine. "Your children love you," Greer told me, as we prepared for my pre-surgery appointment. "But they're terrified of losing you, which makes them want to control everything. My job is to make sure they remember you're still the mother, not the patient." The surgery consultation with Dr. Henley revealed the full complexity of what lay ahead. She was a woman about Vera's age, competent and direct without being cold, someone who clearly understood that information was more comforting than false reassurance. "The cancer has spread beyond the ovaries to the abdominal lining," she explained, pointing to scans that looked like abstract art to my untrained eyes. "Surgery can remove the visible tumors, but chemotherapy will be necessary to address any remaining cancer cells." Elias asked detailed questions about success rates and survival statistics, his business mind trying to quantify hope. Vera inquired about quality of life issues and long-term side effects, her documentary instincts gathering comprehensive information. Sebastian wanted to know about integrative treatments and holistic support options, I found myself listening to their questions and recognizing something profound. They were asking everything I hadn't been able to ask during 4 months of avoidance. Their love was giving me permission to fully engage with my diagnosis instead of hiding from it. "What's the timeline?" I asked Dr. Henley. "Surgery Tuesday morning. You'll be in the hospital for about a week. Then 6 weeks of recovery before chemotherapy begins. The chemo regimen is 6 cycles, 1 every 3 weeks, so approximately 5 months total. And prognosis?" Dr. Henley's honesty was both comforting and terrifying. "With aggressive treatment, we're looking at a 70% 5-year survival rate. But every case is individual, and your overall health is excellent for someone your age, 5 years. The number hung in the air like morning mist, visible but insubstantial. Enough time to see grandchildren graduate, to travel with my children as adults rather than obligations, to finish the botanical book I'd been writing for a decade, or not enough time for any of those things. That evening we gathered in the living room for what felt like a family board meeting about my mortality. The formal inheritance competition had been abandoned, but we still needed to address practical questions about the estate, my care, and our family's future. "I want to revise my will," I announced. "Not because of the cancer, but because this summer has taught me something important about inheritance." My children tensed, probably expecting another test or evaluation. "I'm dividing everything equally among the 3 of you," I continued. "Not because you've proven yourselves worthy, but because you're my children, and I love you. The estate should be shared, not competed for." Elias looked relieved. "That seems fair. But I have one condition," I added. "You have to maintain Marigold. Veil together. Not sell it, not divide it, but share it. I want this to remain a place where the family gathers, where your children and their children can experience what we built here." Vera frowned. "That's a big commitment, Mom. Maintaining this place, coordinating schedules." "It's also an opportunity," Sebastian interjected. "To stay connected, to give our kids what we lost. Regular contact, shared traditions, family time that's not just obligatory." The conversation that followed was practical and emotional, covering everything from house maintenance schedules to holiday traditions to decision-making processes. But underneath the logistics was a more fundamental discussion about what kind of family we wanted to be going forward. "I want to be the kind of mother and grandmother who people actually want to visit," I said. "Not because they feel guilty or obligated, but because being together brings joy, and we want to be the kind of children and siblings who show up," Elias replied. "Not just for crises, but for regular life." As the evening wound down and my children dispersed to their rooms, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation about our family's future. Not the nervous worry that had characterized my relationships with them for so long, but genuine excitement about the people we might become together. The cancer remained a dark cloud on the horizon, but it no longer felt like a storm I had to weather alone. For the first time in years, I had my children beside me, not as judges or evaluators or competitors, but as partners in whatever came next. Tomorrow I would begin the medical fight of my life. But tonight I fell asleep, surrounded by the sounds of my adult children talking quietly in the kitchen, planning meals for my recovery, researching gentle exercises for chemotherapy patients, discussing how to make Marigold Vale a place of healing rather than just residence. The inheritance they would receive wasn't just money and property, but something more valuable: the knowledge that love can be rebuilt, that families can change, that it's never too late to choose connection over distance. The surgery took 8 hours, though I remember none of it. Dr. Henley later told me they'd removed both ovaries, my fallopian tubes, part of my abdominal lining, and several lymph nodes that had shown signs of cancer spread. What I experienced was simply going to sleep in one life and waking up in another, one where my body felt foreign and fragile, where pain was managed by machines that beeped softly through the night, where my children took turns sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair because they refused to leave me alone. "Mom?" Sebastian's voice was the first thing I heard as consciousness returned, his hand gentle on my arm. "You're okay. The surgery went well. Dr. Henley said they got everything they could see." Everything they could see. The phrase would echo through my recovery, a reminder that cancer is an enemy that hides in shadows, requiring faith as much as medicine to defeat. The first week in the hospital blurred together in a haze of pain medication and careful visits from family members who tried to balance encouragement with honesty. Elias arrived each morning with business efficiency, checking with nurses about my progress, reviewing discharge plans, ensuring that every detail of my care was optimized. But he also brought daily reports about the estate, how Greer was managing, the household, which flowers were blooming in the garden, how the community service organizations were asking about my children's continued involvement. "The kids at the community garden miss Sebastian," he told me one afternoon. "They made you a card." The construction paper card was covered with crayon drawings of vegetables and flowers, with messages written in careful child handwriting. "Get better, Mrs. Iris's mom," and "We are growing carrots for you." The innocent directness of their wishes made me cry in a way that adult sympathy cards couldn't touch. Vera approached my recovery like a research project, but her documentarian skill served us well. She'd interviewed other cancer patients about their experiences, consulted with nutritionists about post-surgery diet plans, and created what she called the Recovery Resource Guide, a comprehensive manual covering everything from managing surgical pain to preparing for chemotherapy side effects. "I know you think I'm being excessive," she said, sitting beside my hospital bed with her laptop and notebooks. "But information feels like control, and control feels like hope. It's not excessive," I assured her. "It's love expressed through competence, which is very much who you are." Sebastian had transformed the conservatory at home into what he called a healing sanctuary, consulting with Greer about which plants might provide aromatherapy benefits, rearranging furniture to create comfortable spaces for rest and gentle movement, installing speakers for meditation music and nature sounds. "I want you to feel like you're recovering in a garden," he explained during one of his visits. "Not in a medical facility, but in a place that feeds your spirit as well as your body." The depth of his thoughtfulness surprised me. Sebastian had always been the most emotionally intuitive of my children, but I'd mistaken his gentle nature for passivity. This crisis was revealing a strength I hadn't recognized, the courage to create beauty in difficult circumstances, to tend to healing with the same patience he brought to growing things. But it was the dynamics between my children that provided the most profound recovery medicine. Instead of reverting to childhood roles and rivalries, they were discovering how to function as adult siblings, supporting a shared purpose. I watched Elias defer to Vera's research when making decisions about treatment facilities, saw Vera incorporate Sebastian's wellness insights into her recovery planning, observed Sebastian rely on Elias's organizational systems to coordinate care logistics. They were learning to value each other's gifts instead of competing for superiority. "We've never worked together like this," Vera told me one evening as we reviewed chemotherapy preparation materials. As adults with different skills contributing to the same goal. What was different before? I asked. Before, we were always trying to prove ourselves to you instead of helping each other. Competition instead of collaboration. The observation was painful and accurate. Harold and I had unintentionally created a dynamic where our children felt they needed to earn love through achievement rather than simply receive it through belonging. My inheritance competition had initially replicated that pattern, but the cancer diagnosis had forced us beyond performance into authenticity. After 10 days, I came home to a house that had been transformed into something between a medical facility and a retreat center. The master bedroom had been equipped with everything necessary for comfortable recovery. Adjustable pillows, a bedside table organized with medications and water, books chosen specifically for my interests, and fresh flowers from the garden changed daily. The conservatory had become my primary living space, surrounded by plants but also by the evidence of my children's presence. Elias's business papers spread across Harold's old desk as he worked remotely. Vera's research materials organized on every available surface. Sebastian's guitar propped in the corner where he'd played gentle music during my afternoon rest periods. But the most significant change was less tangible. The quality of conversation and connection that filled the house. Instead of the careful politeness that had characterized our family interactions for years, we were learning to speak honestly about fear, hope, love, and uncertainty. I'm scared, I admitted to my children during my first week home, as we gathered for one of Luca's conversation dinners. Not just of dying, but of what chemotherapy will do to me. Of becoming someone you have to take care of instead of someone you choose to be with. Elias, who had spent years avoiding emotional directness, surprised me with his response. "Mom, taking care of you isn't a burden. It's an honor. And it's also payback for 40 years of you taking care of us, even when we didn't appreciate it. Besides," Sebastian added with a gentle smile, "maybe being vulnerable together will teach us things we couldn't learn when everyone was trying to be strong all the time." Vera nodded. "I've been thinking about that. About how I've spent years documenting other people's healing journeys. But I never understood what healing actually requires until we started this. What does it require?" I asked. "Showing up imperfectly," she replied. "Being present for messy, uncomfortable, uncertain experiences instead of waiting until everything is resolved and beautiful." As my surgical recovery progressed, we developed routines that balanced care with independence, support with space. Mornings in the conservatory with coffee and light breakfast, reviewing the day's plans. Afternoon rest periods when I'd read or nap while my children worked quietly nearby. Evening gatherings for dinner and conversation. Sometimes serious discussions about treatment plans. Sometimes light sharing about their community service experiences, which they'd chosen to continue. The community service assignments, initially designed to reveal character, had evolved into something more meaningful. Genuine engagement with local needs that connected my children to the place where they'd grown up. Elias had begun consulting with the food bank about operational efficiency. But he'd also formed genuine friendships with families he was helping. Vera was creating a documentary about adult literacy that would be used for fundraising and awareness. Sebastian had proposed a children's garden education program that would continue beyond our family's residence at Marigold Vale. "It's funny," Camille observed during one of our evening conversations. "The inheritance competition brought you all together, but the cancer is keeping you together." "Maybe they were the same thing," Luca suggested with his characteristic insight. Different ways of asking the same question. How do we love each other authentically instead of obligatorily? 3 weeks after surgery, Dr. Henley cleared me to begin chemotherapy. The treatment would be administered every 3 weeks for 6 cycles, each session lasting several hours with side effects that would accumulate over time. Fatigue, nausea, potential hair loss, compromised immune system. The first cycle is often the hardest emotionally, she explained during our pre-treatment consultation. Not because the physical effects are worst, but because it makes the cancer feel real in a way that surgery doesn't. She was right. Walking into the chemotherapy infusion center for my first treatment felt like crossing a threshold into a country I'd never wanted to visit. The room was designed to be cheerful, comfortable recliners, large windows, volunteer therapy dogs. But underneath the optimism was an unavoidable reality. Everyone here was fighting for their life. My children had wanted to accompany me, but I'd asked them to take turns rather than overwhelming the space with anxious family energy. Elias came to the first treatment, bringing his laptop to work while the medication dripped slowly into my arm through an IV port. "Tell me about the business you're working on," I requested, wanting conversation that connected me to life beyond cancer. For the next 3 hours, Elias described a project involving sustainable energy development, his excitement about the environmental impact, his concern about investor pressure to prioritize profits over principles. As I listened, I realized this was the first time in years that he'd shared his work with genuine enthusiasm rather than mere success metrics. "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in his letter," Elias said toward the end of the treatment session, "about not letting achievement become a substitute for connection. This project feels different because it's about building something meaningful, not just profitable." "And how does that feel?" "Scarier," he admitted, "but also more alive." For the second treatment, Vera accompanied me, bringing interview equipment to record what she called Mom's Cancer Chronicles. Not for public use, but as a family document, a way of capturing the experience for ourselves and potentially for grandchildren who might face similar challenges. "Tell me what you want us to remember about this time," she said, setting up her camera with professional care. "That we learned how to be a family again," I replied without hesitation. "That cancer gave us permission to love each other directly, instead of carefully." Sebastian came to the third treatment with his guitar, having received permission from the infusion center staff to provide gentle live music for patients who wanted it. As chemotherapy medications worked their way through my system, he played soft melodies that seemed to ease not just my discomfort, but that of other patients nearby. "Music therapy," explained a nurse named Maria. "Research shows it can help with anxiety and pain management during treatment. But for me, Sebastian's music provided something more valuable than medical benefit. The sound of my son using his boche, gifts to bring comfort to others. The evidence that his gentle nature had grown into purposeful healing. By the fourth treatment cycle, the physical effects of chemotherapy had intensified. I'd lost most of my hair, requiring the wig that Greer had helped me select. Something dignified, but not too formal. You're not attending a board meeting, you're living your life. My energy levels fluctuated unpredictably. Good days followed. By exhausting ones, moments of normal appetite interspersed with waves of nausea. But paradoxically, as my body weakened, my relationships strengthened. The pretenses that had separated our family for years had become impossible to maintain in the face of real vulnerability. My children had seen me at my worst, exhausted, nauseated, frightened, and had responded with love rather than judgment. "I never knew how much I needed to take care of you," Camille told me one afternoon, as she helped me with a gentle walk around the garden. Not because you're helpless, but because caring for someone you love feels meaningful in a way that self-care never quite manages. The observation captured something essential about what we'd discovered together. My summer inheritance competition had been based on the assumption that love needed to be earned through demonstration of worth. But the cancer experience was teaching us that love grows through the simple act of showing up for each other's vulnerability and need. As we approached the final chemotherapy treatment, Dr. Henley scheduled follow-up scans to assess the treatment's effectiveness. The results would determine not just my prognosis, but our family's future planning. Whatever the scans show, I told my children the night before the appointment, I want you to know that this summer saved my life in ways that have nothing to do with cancer treatment. How so? Sebastian asked. I was dying of loneliness before you came home, I admitted. Not the cancer. Loneliness. I'd let myself believe that I'd failed as a mother because we weren't close anymore. This experience taught me that love can be rebuilt at any age, that families can heal, that it's never too late to choose connection over distance. The scans would reveal that the chemotherapy had been successful. The visible tumors had disappeared. My blood markers had returned to normal ranges. My prognosis had improved significantly. But the real healing had already occurred. The restoration of relationships that I'd feared were permanently damaged. The discovery that my children were exactly the people I'd hoped they would become. The knowledge that Marigold Vale would continue to be a place where love was cultivated and shared. The inheritance they would receive was no longer just property and money, but something more valuable. The experience of loving imperfectly but persistently. The knowledge that families can grow and change. The confidence that showing up for each other's struggles creates bonds stronger than obligation or expectation. 6 months after my final chemotherapy treatment, I sit in the conservatory on a crisp October morning, watching my grandchildren play in the same gardens where their parents once built fairy houses and learned to tend growing things. The maple forests surrounding Marigold Vale have exploded into their annual display of orange and red, a spectacular reminder that beauty often emerges from the process of letting go. My hair has grown back silver white and shorter than before, making me look, according to Greer, distinguished rather than elderly. The wig sits in my closet like a costume from a play I once performed in, a reminder of a character I inhabited but no longer need to be. My energy has returned gradually, though I've learned to honor my body's new rhythms rather than forcing old patterns of productivity. The latest scans show no evidence of cancer, a phrase that feels miraculous each time Dr. Henley speaks it. No evidence of disease doesn't mean cured. Ovarian cancer is too unpredictable for such certainty. But it means hope, time, the possibility of years rather than months. More importantly, it means I've been given the chance to fully experience the transformation that began with last summer's inheritance competition and bloomed during my cancer treatment. Elias arrives every Friday evening now, often staying through Sunday morning. He's restructured his business priorities, delegating more responsibility to his team, and focusing on projects that align with his values, rather than just his ambitions. Last month, he and Camille announced they're trying to have a baby, a decision that Camille says was inspired by witnessing multi-generational love. During my treatment, I want to raise children who know their grandmother, she told me. Not just as someone they visit on holidays, but as someone who's actively present in their lives. Elias has also become the family's unofficial coordinator, managing the shared calendar that ensures Marigold Vale remains a gathering place rather than just a residence. He's approaching family maintenance with the same attention to detail he once reserved for corporate acquisitions. But now the project is love rather than profit. Vera visits monthly, often bringing Luca and whatever documentary projects she's currently developing. She completed her adult literacy film, which premiered at a regional film festival, and is now being used by literacy organizations across New England. But more significantly, she's begun documenting our family's cancer journey, creating what she calls an honest record of how families heal. I spent years making films about other people's transformations, she told me during her last visit. I needed to learn how to participate in my own transformation, not just observe it. Her relationship with me has shifted from defensive criticism to collaborative curiosity. Instead of approaching our conversations like interviews designed to uncover evidence of my failures, she engages with genuine interest in understanding my perspectives and sharing her own vulnerabilities. Sebastian has surprised everyone by deciding to settle permanently at Marigold Vale. He's established a wellness practice that combines his spiritual training with practical skills, offering services like meditation instruction, yoga therapy, and garden-based healing programs. The Community Garden Project has evolved into something larger, an intergenerational program that connects elderly residents with young families, using shared gardening as a foundation for mutual support. I spent years running from home because I thought it was too small for my dreams, he explained. But I'm learning that home is what I make it, and I can create something meaningful here. He's also become my primary companion for daily walks, afternoon garden tours, and evening conversations about everything from plant genetics to spiritual philosophy. His presence provides a kind of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. The comfort of being with someone who values being rather than doing, presence rather than achievement. The inheritance arrangement has been finalized according to the new will I drafted after abandoning the competition structure. The estate is divided equally among my 3 children, but with the requirement that they maintain Marigold Vale as a shared family property. They've created what they call the Family Charter, a document outlining how decisions will be made, responsibilities shared, and conflicts resolved. More importantly, they've committed to specific practices designed to maintain the connection that cancer treatment revealed was possible between us. Monthly family gatherings, either in person or virtual. Annual working vacations where we tackle estate maintenance projects together. Regular one-on-one time between me and each child, not for major conversations or crisis management, but for the simple pleasure of each other's company. We're trying to institutionalize intimacy, Vera said with characteristic directness. Making sure that caring for each other doesn't depend on crisis to create priority. The community service assignments that began as character evaluation have continued as voluntary engagement. Elias serves on the food bank's board of directors, applying his strategic planning skills to addressing food insecurity. Vera has begun offering documentary workshops for teenagers, teaching them to tell their own stories. Sebastian's Children's Garden program has expanded to 3 locations, with waiting lists of families wanting to participate. It turns out that serving others while serving each other creates some kind of positive feedback loop, Camille observed during our last family dinner, like the relationships reinforce each other. Greer remains the household's anchor, though she's agreed to accept more help with daily tasks, as both of us acknowledge the realities of aging. She's training Sebastian in her household management, systems, ensuring that Marigold Vale standards will be maintained even as responsibilities transition. 50 years from now, when your grandchildren are sitting in this conservatory with their own children, I want them to feel the same sense of being cared for that you've created here. she told me recently. That kind of legacy requires maintenance. The botanical book I'd been writing for a decade was finally completed during my cancer recovery, when long hours of rest provided time for reflection and writing. Vera helped me organize the material. Sebastian contributed photographs of the estate's gardens, and Elias arranged for publication with a small press that specializes in regional natural history. A Gardener's Life, 50 Years of Growing Things at Marigold Vale, was released last month, dedicated to Harold and to the children who taught me that love, like gardens, requires patience, attention, and faith in growth that happens slowly, in seasons we cannot control. The book has found a modest but enthusiastic audience among other gardeners and botanists. But more importantly, it serves as a tangible record of the life Harold and I built together, the knowledge we accumulated, the beauty we cultivated over decades of shared work. Writing it taught me something crucial about legacy. It's not just what we leave behind, but how we choose to remember and honor what came before. The stories we tell about our lives, the meaning we find in ordinary experiences, the wisdom we extract from both joy and struggle. Harold's letters to our children, which I finally shared with them last Christmas, have become family treasures. Each child has framed their letter and keeps it in their room at Marigold Vale, Harold's words serving as guidance and encouragement whenever they visit. Sometimes I read Dad's letter when I'm struggling with a decision, Elias told me. Not because it gives me answers, but because it reminds me of who I want to be. The summer that began with my inheritance competition feels like a different lifetime, though it was only 18 months ago. That Iris, lonely, resentful, convinced her children's absence meant they didn't love her, seems like someone I knew well but no longer am. Cancer forced me to confront the possibility that my story might end without resolution, that I might die without knowing if my children and I could find our way back to each other. But fighting cancer together created opportunities for intimacy that normal life had somehow made impossible. I think we needed a crisis to give us permission to love each other imperfectly, Sebastian said during our last family meeting. Like, we couldn't be vulnerable when everything was fine, but we could be honest when everything was scary. This morning, as I watched 3-year-old Emma, Elias and Camille's daughter, chase butterflies between the dahlia beds while 5-year-old Marcus, Vera and Luca's son, helped Sebastian plant bulbs for next spring's display, I understand something fundamental about inheritance that I'd missed during my elaborate summer competition. Legacy isn't something you pass down. It's something you create together. The love, traditions, values, and connections that will survive me are being built through daily choices, ordinary moments, the accumulated experience of showing up for each other across time. My inheritance to my children isn't primarily financial, though the money and property provide security and opportunity. It's not even the estate itself, though Marigold Vale will remain a gathering place for generations if they choose to honor that commitment. My inheritance is the knowledge that families can heal, that love can be rebuilt, that it's never too late to choose connection over distance. It's the experience of fighting together for something that matters, the memory of being cared for during vulnerability, the confidence that they can face future challenges with support rather than alone. This afternoon, Dr. Henley will conduct my routine follow-up examination, checking for any signs that the cancer has returned. I no longer approach these appointments with the terror that characterized my early treatment period. Not because I'm not afraid. Fear of recurrence will probably always live somewhere in my consciousness. But because I know now that whatever comes, I won't face it alone. If the cancer returns, my children will gather again, not out of obligation, but out of love. If it doesn't, we'll continue building the relationships that have become the foundation of my daily happiness. Either way, I'm no longer the isolated woman who sat in this conservatory last summer, plotting elaborate tests to determine if her children cared about her. I'm someone who is cared for, who cares deeply in return, who has learned that inheritance is not about what you leave behind, but about what you build together while you're still here to participate in the building. Tonight we'll gather for one of Luca's conversation dinners, where Emma will probably fall asleep in Sebastian's lap, while Marcus describes his kindergarten adventures to anyone willing to listen. Elias will update us on his latest sustainable energy project. Vera will share clips from her current documentary, and Sebastian will play guitar while we all sing along to songs that span generations. Greer will serve food that nourishes body and soul. Camille will document moments that capture the ordinary magic of family life, and I'll sit at the center of it all, surrounded by the sound of voices I love, grateful for the second chance I never expected to receive. The inheritance competition that brought my children home has evolved into something larger, a commitment to creating love that lasts, to building relationships that can weather crisis and change, to maintaining connection across distance and difference and time. This is the legacy I'm most proud to leave. Not money or property, or even the beautiful gardens Harold and I spent decades cultivating, but the knowledge that love can always be rebuilt, that families can always change, that it's never too late to choose each other. The conservatory has changed. The glass panels, meticulously cleaned by Greer's successor, a young horticulturist named Alina, now reflect not only the shifting Vermont skies, but the movement of great-grandchildren tumbling through the hallway beyond. What once held orchids and Harold's journals now also shelters bean sprouts grown in recycled yogurt containers, art projects clipped to string with tiny wooden pegs, and a rotating schedule of family photos that get replaced each season. It has been 20 years since Iris Lenore Vale passed away in her sleep, a week after her 99th birthday, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, the final notes of a lullaby Sebastian strummed on his guitar, lingering in the candlelit room. And yet, her presence at Marigold Vale remains as tangible as the scent of lavender from the southern beds, or the creak of the old floorboards she refused to have replaced. In accordance with the family charter she helped establish, her ashes were mixed into the soil of the East Garden, beneath a newly planted weeping cherry tree that blooms every April with ethereal white petals. Sebastian had insisted on it. She always said the seasons were conversations. Let her be part of spring's reply. Marigold Vale has not only survived but evolved. Greer passed on 5 years after Iris, but not before training Alina, who now manages the estate with the same no-nonsense warmth. The estate has become a hybrid of family residence, retreat center, and community hub. There are 4 permanent households, Sebastian and his partner Miguel in the main house, Vera and Luca, who divide time between the converted carriage house and their Brooklyn loft, Elias and Camille, who eventually built a modest solar home on the edge of the forest, where Camille now runs a residency program for artists documenting climate change and intergenerational resilience. The family calendar, once a simple spreadsheet managed by Elias, has evolved into a dynamic living document projected on the foyer wall, connected to everyone's devices. Color-coded events include everything from annual maple syrup boiling weekends to monthly communal dinners. The second Saturday of every month is Sacred Saturday. No work, no phones, only presence. Emma, now 23, teaches environmental biology at a local college and has taken over as the estate's lead archivist. She has digitized Iris's botanical notes, turned Harold's journals into an interactive website, and leads the annual storytelling weekend each June, where family and guests share growth stories, inspired by the themes of gardens, legacy, and transformation. Marcus, Vera, and Luca's son runs the expanded Children's Garden Initiative, now known as Seeds of Self. What began as a summer project is now a regional nonprofit with chapters across New England, connecting kids with elders through gardening, storytelling, and care-based mentorship. And then there is the newest generation, 6 grandchildren, ages 3 to 9, who have never known a version of Marigold Vale that wasn't centered on radical love, shared work, and spiritual ecology. They grow up among compost bins and poetry readings, between heirloom tomato rows and memory circles, knowing that tending soil and tending relationships are 2 sides of the same practice. Vera, now 72, still makes documentaries. Her latest project, Inheritance Rewritten, is a meditation on how familial wounds can become sources of wisdom. It features footage from Iris's final months, the establishment of the family charter, and intimate interviews with each sibling reflecting on their long journey from estrangement to chosen kinship. "We were siblings by birth," Elias says in one poignant segment. But becoming family? That took intention. It took falling apart and building again. Elias retired from corporate life a decade ago, shifting his focus entirely to social impact, projects. He runs a think tank that helps wealthy families reimagine legacy as service rather than status. Sebastian's wellness programs have grown into a network of healing spaces modeled after Marigold Vale's ethos. Garden Spirit, as the initiative is called, hosts annual retreats on presence-based leadership and grief-integrated creativity. Camille, ever the documentarian of beauty, now curates the Family Archive, a digital and physical collection of photos, journals, music, and recipes. Every holiday, she releases a family newsletter filled with updates, reflections, and Irisisms, phrases the matriarch was known for. Love is not an achievement, it's a practice, pruned to encourage growth. Let the silence speak before you fill it. Greer's granddaughter June works as a hospitality coordinator at the estate. She remembers her grandmother's stories, has memorized the layout of every room, and leads visitors on tours that begin with, "This house didn't just grow people, it healed them." The East Conservatory is now named the Iris Room. It's used for morning meditations, late-night tea talks, and an annual ritual called the Blooming Table, where each person places an object or story that represents something they're nurturing. Last year, young Theo placed a pine cone and said, "I'm growing my courage." Everyone wept. What Iris began as a desperate experiment has become, over 2 decades, a living organism of love. She once feared being forgotten, yet she is remembered, not as a distant portrait, but as the soil itself, the foundation, the nourishment, the memory of how things bloom again and again. Legacy here is not marble and wealth. It's compost and calendula. It's teaching each other how to hold grief gently and joy boldly. It's showing up for each other over time, across difference, without scoreboard or conditions. As Marcus once said during the fall equinox gathering, "We are not descendants of Iris Vale. We are gardeners of her story." And so they continue. In the garden, a great-grandchild plants tulip bulbs beside the weeping cherry. It is late October. Frost is on the edges of the leaves. Beside him, his older cousin reads from Iris's memoir. Inside, laughter rises from the kitchen, where stories are being told, food is being shared, and love, endlessly practiced, is being prepared for another season. The roots run deep, and spring always comes. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.